Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to embark on, well, kind of like a foundational investigative journey. We are going to deconstruct the very building blocks of existence. I know, it sounds like a massive task, right? But look, by breaking it down logically and really examining the evidence, we can actually solve the ultimate mystery of what makes something fundamentally alive.
But hey, before we start dusting for fingerprints or pulling out the microscopic evidence, we gotta set the foundation. To solve this mystery, we first need to break apart our core subject into its ancient origins. You know, language often holds the best clues, and the very name of our subject basically gives away its underlying purpose. We can ground the science right here in human language. The word biology isn't just some random label they picked out of a hat. It comes from two ancient Greek words. First up, we've got bios, which literally translates to life. And then we have logos, meaning the study of or reason. So put them together, and biology literally translates to the study of life. It's basically the human attempt to reason with existence itself. But that simple translation raises a much, much deeper, almost philosophical question. What exactly is life? How do we actually know something is alive versus just, being a collection of inert matter? Really think about that for a second.
Now, what's really interesting about this next part is that scientists don't just guess at this. They've developed a highly rigorous checklist. Think of this like a super strict VIP door policy. These are the 7 strict rules our suspect absolutely has to follow to be considered truly alive. Miss even one of these criteria? Yeah, you don't make the cut. Let's look at the evidence. Number 1, there must be organization. Life is incredibly structured. It scales all the way up from tiny, invisible atoms to whole, complex organisms. Even a single microscopic bacterium isn't just a random blob of chemicals floating around. It possesses a highly organized interior with specific parts doing very specific jobs. This kind of structure is the first real proof of life.
Okay, but to keep that organization going, you need fuel, right? And that brings us to metabolism. All living things take in energy and use it. It's simple. Energy in, waste out. For humans, we eat food. For a plant, well, it absorbs sunlight. Despite looking completely different on the outside, both are basically engines of life turning on.
Next up, living things don't just stay stagnant. They require growth and development. They increase in size and complexity over time. Just consider how a tiny, seemingly lifeless seed transforms into a massive, towering tree, or how a single fertilized egg multiplies to become a fully formed human being. That kind of dynamic change is an absolute hallmark of being alive. Then there's the response to stimuli. Living things absolutely have to be able to react to changes in their environment. If you accidentally touch a hot flame, boom, you instantly pull your hand away to protect yourself. Even a simple potted plant sitting on your windowsill will physically turn and grow toward the sunlight. Bottom line, if it can't react, it won't survive. And speaking of survival, we arrive at rule number 5, reproduction. Living things must produce offspring. Honestly, this one is non-negotiable for the long term. Without reproduction, an entire species would just simply disappear from existence. The chain of life literally has to be passed on to a new generation. Another completely crucial necessity is homeostasis. Living things relentlessly maintain a stable internal environment. Think about how your own body works. Even if you step outside on a freezing, snowy day, your core temperature fiercely maintains itself right around 37 degrees Celsius. You shiver to create heat, constantly fighting the outside environment just to keep your internal balance perfectly stable. Finally, we reach adaptation, or evolution. Over generations, populations change to better fit their environments. But actually, let's pause right here for a second, because this final characteristic carries a very specific and, honestly, a very often misunderstood condition. This is probably one of the most common misconceptions out there. An individual organism does not evolve. You cannot evolve. I cannot evolve. Evolution is strictly a property of populations over many, many generations. The species adapts over time, not a single individual during its own lifetime. It's a hugely vital distinction to make. So, now that we know the strict criteria our suspect must follow, let's move on and see how this all builds together. We're going to construct the physical structure of living things step by step to find out exactly where life truly begins. We start down at the absolute bottom. Step 1, atoms. We know atoms aren't alive. Step 2, organelles. Those are the tiny parts inside a cell. Step 3, the cell itself. And Step 4, whole organisms, like you and me. As we climb this ladder from atoms up to organelles, we are essentially searching for that precise, magical threshold where our 7 rules suddenly lock in and apply. And here is the crucial point. If we drop down just one single level below the cell to those organelles, the rules of life completely fall apart. An isolated mitochondrion cannot reproduce. An isolated nucleus cannot respond to stimuli. They're just complex biological machinery. They are not alive.
But then we hit the cell. This right here is the aha moment of our detective story. A single solitary cell perfectly satisfies all the foundational criteria. It takes in nutrients and expels waste. It grows larger. It senses its environment. It divides to reproduce. It maintains internal balance. One cell alone checks every single box, which is exactly why it's universally recognized as the fundamental unit of life. So we've caught our suspect. The cell is life. But let's take a bit of a historical cool down here, all right? Where did this ultimate biological building block actually get its name? The origin of the word is incredibly surprising and paints such a fascinating picture. To really understand it, we need to travel all the way back to the year 1665. Just imagine an English scientist named Robert Hooke. He's sitting in his study, peering through this beautifully primitive microscope at a super thin slice of cork. What Hooke saw through those lenses literally changed history. He didn't see a solid block of wood. Instead, he saw rows upon rows of tiny, empty compartments. Now, remember, he was looking at dead cork, so he was only seeing the empty outer walls. And to Hooke, this repeating grid of little boxed-in spaces looked strikingly similar to a monastery. Specifically, they reminded him of the small, sparse living quarters where monks resided. Because of that distinct visual resemblance, Hooke turned to Latin. He used the word cella, which quite literally translates to a small room. And that's it. That is the exact moment. He coined the foundational term we still use in biology every single day. A cell is, quite simply, just a tiny room. But here is the ultimate takeaway to leave you with. Hooke only saw the empty building. He looked at the cork and saw the walls, but he had absolutely no idea what was actually going on inside those tiny rooms. It's kind of like looking at the outside of a massive apartment complex and not knowing anyone actually lives there. So the ultimate question remains, who or what lives inside the cell? The story of how scientists cracked open that door is a whole other detective story. But for now, we've defined our suspect. We know what life is. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and remember, always keep questioning what you see.